talk to me about inflation, because I was looking at some of the inflation numbers, and you have to go back to the 80s to see anything that's approaching double digit. I remember being just a kid hearing about double digit inflation. I could kind of remember the gas pumps, the lines at the gas. It's like a distant memory of me in the 70s. But how do you talk to younger people these days about what inflation is or it means? Because I don't think people really grasp what it actually means to your savings or to the economy in even a medium term.
Well, that's exactly right, Brian. And if you, you're a little younger than I am, but I lived through it. I started my career in banking in 1976, and I remember my wife and I used to kid each other. She was in advertising, I was in banking, and the inflation was so bad, you'd get a raise every like 4 or 5 months, and you didn't have to ask. They would just give it to you because they knew that you were going to quit if they didn't keep up. So she would get a raise, and she was making more than I was at the time. So we'd go out to dinner, and then I would get a raise, and I was making more than she was. So we would just tease each other about that. But that's how it was. And the psychology was, if you needed a TV set or refrigerator, new car, whatever, you say, I better buy it now because the price is going to be higher. If I wait a month or 2 months, the price is going to run away from me. So it had huge behavioral effects. Of course, gold was, going to the moon. There was a lot going on at the time. But Brian, you're right when you say we're putting up inflation numbers today that are the highest in 40 years. That is correct. A little 41, actually it was 1981 before we saw these numbers. But I remind people, the inflation in 1981 was the end of a 10-year period of inflation. It wasn't the beginning. You say, oh, that's some inflation. Yeah, we did, but it had started. Some ways it started in 1968 and it really took off in 1974, 75. So 81, these numbers, that was when Volcker finally got it under control. But you go back to 80, 70, between 77 and 81, so that 5-year period, the dollar lost 50% of its purchasing power, not 15, 50 in that 5-year stretch. So you were putting up numbers, 10%, 11%, 13% and higher year after year. Yeah, 1981, it was, 9 or 10, which is what they're comparing it to today. But that was on the downslope. It had been higher than that in 77, 78, and 79. So the question is this the beginning of an inflationary surge where it's going to get even worse and it is going to last 5 years? Or is it different than that? But keep that in mind, because the 40-year comparison, it is correct, but that was the tail end of an even worse episode.
And I think, Jim, you've actually said that this inflation is going to turn to deflation faster than most people realize. Can you explain what that means and then what that looks like, and then maybe the ramifications of that?
Sure. That is my view. I'm happy to explain it. And it catches a lot of people by surprise. They're like, wait a second, Jim, it's inflation. You just look at 2022, starting in January, it was kind of like 7%. And then it was, it's 8.1, it's 8.6. Now it's 9.1, which is true. That is this year. It is going up. So people extrapolate that. And again, there is this comparison to the 70s. By the way, I think the situation we're in today is very different from the 1970s, and I'll explain why. But I'll explain why right now, because in the 70s, it was triggered from the supply side with first the Arab oil embargo in 1973 as a result of the 1973 Arab-Israeli war, and then the price tripled, but it went from like $2 to $6. Okay. But percentage terms, that's a huge jump, but it was still $6. And then it got to 12. And then in 1979, you had a second oil embargo because of Iran and the Ayatollah and the revolution and the hostages and all that. And then it went from kind of 12 to 20. So oil went up by a factor of 10 in the course of the late 70s because there's two different embargoes. So that's coming from the supply side. But what happened was, the other source of inflation is on the demand side. So you have what's called cost push inflation. That's where supplies choked off, or there's an embargo, or there's a shortage, natural disaster, a lot of things. It's coming from the supply side, and demand is inelastic, so you just pay up or kind of do without. But the demand side is much more psychological. That's called demand pull inflation. That's when consumers behave the way I described. And as I say, I lived through the 70s, where, hey, I better buy it today, I better buy it now. You're pulling all this demand forward and bidding up prices because you're worried that it's going to get even worse.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
I have bad news for you. If you're not rich by now, you're screwed. And if you're in debt, you're even double screwed. How so, you might wonder? Well, the sad truth is that you're working your whole life to make someone else rich. The mega corporations, the banks, the politicians, everyone is getting richer. They get your money. And what is even worse, they get your time, they get your life. You are not even in a rat race, you're in a financial prison. But what could a solution for you look like? Honestly, I don't know, but I know what a solution for me would look like. It's very simple. I use whatever money I have and I multiply it with 1,000. This could make my life much easier and probably yours as well. If you have $1,000 available and multiply this with 1,000, I believe that this could solve some financial issue for the one or the other. Of course, if you're ugly, you would have to multiply it with much more than 1,000. My name is Markus Dahn, and this is what I decided to do. I decided to 1000x my money. This is not a joke. I know what you may be thinking. What is this guy talking about? How should this work? This is not possible. Well, I made a detailed video where I laid out my plan. And some clever folks might even want to look at this plan and copy it and do exactly what I do. This is just a little hint on the side. You have two options. You leave, you forget what you have seen. You do whatever you're doing and you hope that somehow you get some other results. Good luck with that. Or you click the link below the video. You enter your email address because I'm not showing this to everybody. You at least watch my video on how I plan to 1000x my money. The choice is yours. Make the right choice. Join me. See what a different future you could have. See at least how I intend, how I plan to do the 1000x. So click on the link below, enter your email address, and I see you on the other side. Your Markus Dahn.